Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining Foundry Live. Today's session will be about making heroes with Mari 6.0. My name is Elise, and I am part of Foundry's industry marketing team. And today, it's my pleasure to be your virtual host for the session and to introduce you to today's speakers. We have Charli Holt, Mari product manager at Foundry, and Amy Ash, lead character artist from Goodbye Kansas, with us today. Today, Charli will be talking about and Mari 6, the recently released Mari 6, and Amy will be reviewing her creative process when creating the forest elf, which is the hero image for this release. Today's session will end with a live Q&A, so feel free to ask any questions that you may have in the questions tab. And before I pass it over to them, I'd just like to mention that today's webinar is part of the Foundry Live event series. Here are upcoming events listed. And if you're interested in attending any of these events, you can register by following the link that we'll share in the chat. And finally, I would like to thank Dell, Intel, and NVIDIA for powering Foundry Live and for their continued support as a technology partner. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Charli to give an overview of Mari 6. The next portion has been pre-recorded for streaming quality purposes, but we'll be here with you in the chat, so feel free to say hello and to comment along. Enjoy.
Hi everyone, I'm Charli, your friendly neighborhood product manager for Mari. I'm so excited to be here today with Amy Ash, the incredible artist behind our Mari 6 splash screen. I know we all can't wait to hear some of the behind the scenes on how she created our fabulous elven lady, so I'll just quickly run through the great work that our team did for Mari 6 last year. To recap where we left off at the end of the year, it's important that we clarify the library differences between each of the latest Mari versions. 4.8 and 5.0 are both VFX Reference Platform 2020 and use OpenColor.io too. They contain all of the exact same great features, but Mari 4.8 remains on Python 2.7, whereas Mari 5 is Python 3. With Mari 6, our packages have been updated to support VFX Reference Platform 2022, and going forwards, we do only plan on supporting Python 3. So with that in mind, let me welcome you to Mari 6. As we all know, USD has been paving a strong path in the mission to unify pipelines across the VFX industry. Mari 6 is first and foremost a continuation of the USD journey we started long ago, back in Mari 4.7. To start with, we know that a number of artists working in the VFX studio space might be springboarding between Mari and Katana or Mari and their look dev tool in order to verify looks for their dailies. Mari 6 tackles this back and forth by giving you the option to use our interactive selection group tools in order to drive USD facet-based material assignments. Artists can simply pick their selection groups for material assignment from the USD look exporter dialog and have these automatically assigned to the correct facets within that exported USD look. In Mari's future, we see this as a great opportunity to improve our interoperability with LookDev DCCs, where Mari provides all of the asset, material, and network data packaged neatly together in order to have your look development scene ready to go. We recognize that most studio artists are working with a specific final renderer in mind. So Mari 6's advanced USD look exporter is designed to support vendor shader context alongside the USD preview surface shader so that a complete and final USD material can be generated right from the Mari project itself. We've initially provided export solutions for USD looks exported in both Arnold and RenderMan shader context, so that these examples work out of the box and are also readily available for anyone who does wish to adapt them to their own custom shader. Mari texture artists will be able to use these USD look exports in order to accurately compare to the final renderer by publishing fully look developed pipeline-ready assets that can be shared from Mari to your look dev package with ease. USD is what we would internally consider to be a pipeline feature, but outside of our pipeline work, we also really wanted to make sure that Mari 6 provided new tools for artists in both painting and proceduralism workflows, as well as more vital performance improvements as with Mari 5. So to start with one of your most long-awaited proceduralism requests, Mari 6 was our chance to tell you all officially about one of our favorite features, the teleport node. If you're familiar with the well-loved radio node from Mari's extension pack, you may recognize some behavior as this is our own reinterpretation with some added Foundry flair. The teleport node is a node of two parts communicating between broadcaster and receiver across a hidden channel. It can transmit data into and out of nested groups and even be exported within a material, so it will automatically reconnect to a like-named broadcaster on import. In the first phase of the teleport node, we also really wanted to focus on reducing excess clicks and the risk of strain injury from dragging your cursor repetitively across large, unruly node networks. With this in mind, we've added the ability to jump to and from broadcast and receiver, and even introduced the ability to open the broadcasted node properties without having to locate the node in your node graph. This is a huge win for those of us broadcasting between multiple node graph levels. As always, we have a long-standing healthy relationship with the pioneers over at Weta. Back in Mari 5, we saw huge improvements to our baking and flattening speeds coming from the co-development with Weta, and we're happy to share that this teamwork has continued. With Mari 6, both the startup and opening project processes now take significantly less time than before. Due to changes in how we manage our shelf system, Mari 6 only takes approximately 19 seconds to launch when the user has a 600-item shelf, compared to the 2-minute wait in Mari 5. For the same user, loading a project now also takes just 20 seconds instead of 40. As part of this improvement into how we handle our shelf, we've also extended our shelf's functionality to support storing Python snippets as shelf items alongside your materials and custom procedures. This was done with the intention to give artists easier access to smaller script actions in a way that can be shared across the team without the need to go and add that file into your scripts path. So if you're unsure why you need this, what if I told you that you could go and create a small garbage collect script using Mari's API and then share this with your artists? Your artists could then keep this in their shelf, run this themselves, and almost instantly reduce project bloat from excess image data. So go and try that out and thank me later. As our painting feature for the year, Mari 6 introduced the extremely highly requested roller brush. Artists can now paint a tileable image a longer brush stroke so that the image follows your movement, giving you true directional control over your materials. We've already begun work on improving this feature even more and have integrated a lot of the feedback that you've given us into our next maintenance release. This was an incredibly high priority for many artists, and we're excited to keep giving artists tools that are designed with their creative flexibility in mind. So that's Mari 6, but where will our hero's journey take us next? We obviously have some secret ideas already of what we'd like to bring into Mari this year and beyond, but also we would really love to hear from you. Where would you like to see Mari? What painful little niggles really frustrate you whilst you work? Is there anything that you wish we had more tutorials and guides on? And would you like to be teaching or learning Mari, but you just need a hand getting started? Now is the time for reaching out. You have the opportunity to educate us on what's important to you. So please do send in your feature requests, bother us with those pesky bugs, and get in touch with our sales and education teams. There is no problem too minor or too small. We would love to hear from you and have you help us write the next chapter in Mari's story. Hopefully you've enjoyed seeing all of the improvements put out in Mari 6. If you're eager to try them out for yourselves, but you're still unsure on what Mari might bring to your workflow, you are always welcome to try out our Mari non-commercial for free. Download a free 30-day trial of commercial Mari, or reach out to our sales team who can point you into the best direction for you. The Mari team and I are so excited about what we have coming up in store for 2023, and we're looking forward to sharing some of our upcoming plans with you as the year goes on. But that's enough from me. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in today. I'm going to hand you over to the incredible Amy Ash, and I will catch you all in the Q&A.
Hi, and welcome to this webinar. My name is Amy Ash, and over the next 20 minutes or so, I'll be talking about the creation of a forest elf for the release of Mari 6 and the importance of considering story in all stages of character creation. Firstly, a little bit about myself. I'm a lead character artist for cinematics, currently working at Goodbye Kansas Studios in Stockholm, and previously I was with Axis Studios in Glasgow. I've worked in illustration and animation for advertising and cinematics for over 20 years, with past experience as a generalist with a focus on character concepting, modeling, and even animation, before deciding to specialize in character asset creation. Projects I've worked on in the past include the first season of the Tales of Runeterra shorts for Riot Games, the Love, Death and Robots Season 2 episode for Tallgrass, and cinematic trailers for games such as Diablo Immortal, Deathloop, and most recently Forspoken. Towards the second half of last year, the Foundry asked me to create a hero character asset for use in the advertising and splash screen for Mari 6, which was obviously an opportunity I didn't want to miss. They provided me with a detailed brief and a full deck of example images for composition, mood lighting, and colour palette. This was also to be a collaboration with Texturing XYZ, who would supply me with one of their excellent V-Face packs for the character's face, along with any other resources I might require. The creative direction in the brief was clearly geared towards a humanoid fantasy character, shown from the shoulders up in a mystical forest-type setting, with good use of warm, rich colours. I set about making some early, broad decisions. I wanted to create a strong, older female character with authority. This was very much personal preference because I wanted to give myself the opportunity to do something different to the young, pretty female characters that are very common within this industry. So I decided that she would be a matriarch, maybe royalty or a member of the nobility. I also wanted her to have a bit of a combative edge. So I started leaning towards coming from a group that's seen a lot of conflict, and hint that she herself has led people into battle. Finally, I was keen to do something a little different anatomically whilst retaining an overall human look, so I settled on creating an elf. So now I have the bones of a character. She's a leader in a group of warrior-like forest elves, older and wiser for it. As with any project, there are obviously some challenges to overcome, and the main one on here was the available time, as the deadline was reasonably tight and the work needed to be done in my spare time alongside a full-time job, during a busy period at work. It's important with any new project to assess what may impact what's possible, whether that be budget, time, or available resources, and how this may affect the final look of the asset. In this case, I decided to avoid creating any hair for the character, as a groom for a female fantasy character could be very time-consuming. Therefore, I need to create a design that would cover her head. At this point, I want to talk a little bit about the use of story in creating characters. I'm no writer or expert on story structure, so everything I say here is very much how I consider a character story when creating an asset. A lot of this will likely sound obvious, but it's surprising how often it can get dropped by the wayside or forgotten about. When you start creating a character model, depending on what the character is for, the story may come from one of several different sources. If it's a commercial project, the client may provide a storyline or biography for the character. This may be existing lore from a long-running IP or something new entirely. If it's a hero character, you can have lots of information, but for background assets, it's likely you'll have very little other than the character's general role and actions in the film's narrative. But even here, I think it's important to establish creative keywords that describe in some way the biography of the character that you're creating. For personal projects, again, it could be drawing on existing lore or literature, especially in the case of fan art, or you might be creating something entirely from scratch. But regardless, when it's a personal project, you have the ability to take it in any direction you want. When I'm thinking about a character story, I like to divide it into two parts, the backstory and the narrative. The backstory covers the overall biography of a character, who they are, how old they are, where, when, and how they live, who they live with, and the culture they're a part of, what they do, and any major past events that have shaped them in their life. The narrative is more concerned with the character's situation in the moment we are creating. What environment are we in right now? What are the atmospheric conditions? And what are the events that the character is in the middle of? This will obviously have a massive impact on the look of a character. He could be a rich businessman in a fine suit, But if it's in the middle of a drunken brawl in the rain, it's pretty clearly going to be odd if we don't show that in the modeling and texturing of the asset. This helps us make creative decisions about the overall look of a character, but story can be extended to every element of asset creation. How the dirt builds up on someone's face, where damages are most likely to occur, the type of aging in a costume, all this will be impacted by those story elements. Similarly, every object the character carries or wears will have its own story, tied in some way to the character's story. In this case, the backstory is how it was made and by who, what function or purpose does it serve, what is the quality of its construction, and how has it been used and maintained up to this point. The narrative would again consist of where it is right now, the environmental conditions, and the events happening in the scene and how the object is being used by the character and the effect this has on the condition of the object. Consider, for instance, this knife from textures.com. There's a lot of history within it. We can see where regular contact with a hand that's gripping it tightly has darkened and polished the leather on the handle, or how the direction of the scratches on the guard describe the repeated downward cuts it's been used for. It's very old and functional and not very well taken care of, so there's evidence of corrosion and pitting on the blade, and the notches at the end of the blade suggest it's been used to cut harder materials, maybe wood or bone. Going back to the forest elf, I needed to create this character's story myself. I had the bare bones of a backstory at this point, but I needed to explore how this would run through to the details. I started roughing out an idea by working on a speed sculpt in ZBrush. Whenever I'm working on a head without a scan to start from, I prefer to start from a sphere, as personally I find that if I use an existing base mesh, I'll end up spending too much time trying to remove the features of that base mesh from my work. You can see here a little bit of my process, and I will freely admit that most of my speed sculpts of heads look bad for about 70% of the sculpting time. It's only towards the end that it comes together for me. If you look at any of my videos on YouTube of my character sculpts, you'll see the same thing. I tried out a few different ideas that were in my head and finally ended up with an initial block out. It's not detailed, but it's enough for me to get an idea of the forms and decide what's working and what's not. In this case, I decided that it hadn't been hugely successful. The silhouette wasn't interesting, there's no connection to the forest environment in the design, and she doesn't feel like a warrior, but instead a much more regal character, especially with that maya-like chain around her neck. So I started to do some paint overs in Photoshop with the aim of giving her a stronger connection to her habitat and a rougher, spikier silhouette. I gave her a collar made up of leaf shapes that's designed to make a silhouette more imposing and angular. I wanted the crown to be much less rigid and geometrical in its shape language, and more representative of roots and branches. So I designed a headpiece consisting of a metal lattice that twists around itself and has thorn-like elements at the top. The antlers help balance out the asset a bit, but I also thought they could be worn in a crown due to the value her culture places on the creature they come from. The armour itself continues the branch and root theme, with more details curving and twisting around on the surface. In the second iteration, I also started to add more piercings and some decorative scarring on her face. I liked the tribal element that this brought to her. After a few more iterations, I arrived at this final concept. By this point, I'd added some finer details to support her standing in society, such as the embroidery on the hood, and to break up some areas and add interest. The Foundry gave me some really great feedback throughout, and they were very keen to push colour wherever possible. From this arose the idea of her eyes being green like the gem in a crown, which makes the gem almost appear like a third eye as a symbolic representation of her wisdom. From this concept, I created a material call-out. The story elements that were in place by this point all impacted the decisions made here. For instance, she lives in the forest in a warrior-like culture that has a structure and hierarchy, but still has some religion, like an early belief system in Europe. So I wanted her armour to be competently made, but not the finest craftsmanship and materials, and I wanted to avoid luxurious fabrics and instead go with wool and muslin. Some parts of the metalwork could be rougher in construction with visible hammered surfaces. The crown itself, I wanted to be a little rougher still, as if this is the oldest part of her costume. Maybe it's been handed down through generations. I also use a sheet to record ideas for smaller repeating patterns, such as the embroidery on a hood, and how the tree and root motifs could be used within them. Once I had sign off from a Foundry, I could kick on with the modelling. This is a combination of sculpting, polymodelling, and Marvelous Designer for some of the fabrics. Everything was taken back into ZBrush for a final sculpt. I prefer not to spend too long getting things perfect in Marvelous when I know I can fix a lot quite quickly in ZBrush. The mesh itself is fully quadded, but maybe not as even as a production mesh would be. This is simply a case of keeping in mind the usage of the asset and picking my battles a bit. The head mesh uses the texturing XYZ base mesh, which I projected onto my sculpt using Z-Wrap. This meant I could try out multiple V-face packs very quickly, as they all share the same base mesh. The sculpt for the head is clean beyond the secondary shapes and bigger wrinkles, as I wanted to make the most of the displacement layer in the V-face map. UVs came next, and these are important to get right to make texturing easier for yourself later down the line. Nearly all of the shells have the same textile density, which is very important for any elements such as cloth, where you need the pattern you apply in the map to be the same size across all areas. I organized UDIMs into rows as well, according to material type. So I had a row for metal, a row for cloth, and another for leather. This is just easy for organization and for when you're looking at UDIM numbers later on. Finally, any shells that would have smaller patterns on, such as embroidery applied, needed to be straightened out to make this easier later on. So this is the final sculpt. This could definitely have been taken further, but time was against me at this stage and it was important to get it into LUTDev. The beauty of not working in a pipeline in this case means you can change the mesh whenever you want, so I felt if anything was really not holding up, I could return to it later, and in some cases I definitely did. On the metals, I added in some damages and broke up some of the edges, but it's important to get details on metals right, as otherwise it can massively undermine your textures. Again, if you want to add in damage, think about the story. How would that damage have been inflicted and by what? Armor is most likely going to be hit by sharp metal objects. Scratches with soft, blurry edges will never look right in this case, so I make sure any scuffs and scratches I did were sharp in the sculpt. Any softer damages I imagined would be the result of blunt impacts causing dents, imperfections in the manufacturing, or attempted repairs such as hammering out dents. Once the sculpt was finished, I baked out normal, curvature, concavity, and occlusion maps in Nold from the displacement maps. You can bake the maps out in a whole bunch of programs, but I like Nold because it gives nice clean occlusion maps. So here we are in Mari. I have a geometry loaded in just for the armor, and in the objects panel here, I've loaded in the baked mesh maps into the geo channels, so I can easily bring them in using a geo channel node for use in masks. I'm also using the node editor. It's a really nice way of working, and in my opinion, a lot easier to navigate than traditional layers. I've set up the channels I need, and I've created two materials based on Arnold standard surface shaders. One for the metal and one for the leather with a paint node for the mask. Inside the materials, I'm trying to keep things fairly organized using backdrops to group channels. I've already set up basic colors for each channel, and now it's a case of building up detail. With metals, I usually start by getting some roughness variation in there with merge and color nodes, using grunge maps that suit the look I'm going for as masks in tiling nodes. You can add in a levels node to control the contrast of a mask. With the nodes, it's possible to bring masks across to different channels easily as well, so I could use one mask to control the roughness and diffuse variation. Next up, I want to add a lot of fine scratches to the surface of a metal, generally from polishing or any minor impacts that it gets. Even if you don't clearly see them, they add a lot to the look of a metal by breaking up the roughness and spec in a realistic way. Keep these scratches only in a rough channel and set them to a very low amount of roughness. I can use the baked mesh maps in the geo channels to create masks based on mesh details and add filters such as blur to these in bake point nodes so that it's not destructive. Again, I just merge in other maps such as grunge maps or procedural noise nodes to break this mask up a bit. I want those cavities to be a bit darker and rougher where the metal is less polished. From here, it's a case of continually adding variation and detail. There's nothing really fancy about my process technically. It's more based on observation of references and understanding what type of variation and detail you want based on the narrative of the scene and history of the object. I like to add some subtle color variation to metals just to give it a bit of life. Again, even when it's not immediately visible, it still brings something extra. For further variations, I build up masks by merging tiled maps, and then I can use a paint node to multiply the result, so I'm only revealing those details in areas I want to. I'll do the same for pitting. I want my salmon to be a bit older, so it'll naturally have some evidence of surface corrosion in some places. And if you look at any old metal, the first sign of this will be small spots where the top layer of the metal has been eaten away. The pitting does need adding into the bump, roughness, and diffuse, but again, it's best to use the multiplied paint node mask so you're only revealing it in certain areas. Try to think about where the dirt would build up and attack the metal first. Once you're happy with your base material, you can layer on any dirt that sits on top of the surface and would not be metallic. I do this in a new material so I can keep it separate for organization and also export the mask for use in shading, where I'll use a layer shader in Arnold. Here I'm just getting some variation to the color, roughness, and bump within the dirt material, then I can work on the mask. Dirt is one of those areas where story really does come into play. Very often when junior artists are asked to add dirt to something, they might do something a bit like this. A grunge map mask applied across the entire surface. This not only looks unrealistic, but it can also result in a lot of visual noise, and the first comment you are likely to get back is that the dirt feels arbitrary or unintentional. Therefore, we need to build up a more complex dirt mask and consider how and where the dirt might build up. You will need to start painting into the mask rather than using any procedural methods to get a really good result, and you can spend a fair amount of time doing this if you're adding in a lot of detail. On this armor right now, I'm thinking that there's maybe some older, drier dirt in some areas and a bigger, fresher splash to the right side. I use a paint through image tool to place details where I need to. Finally, we can keep adding details to push and support the story of our character. If, for instance, I decided to make her part of a more advanced society, maybe we'd want her armor to have a more intricate detailing, and we can easily add this quickly in texturing. If needed, this could also be put into a displacement map, especially if we get very close to the armor in shot. This is where I was able to get to on metal armor in a relatively short amount of time. By studying and understanding the materials you are making, you'll be able to replicate them much quicker. The Forest Elf obviously has a lot more different materials than this, but I follow a similar process. Get reference, build the base material, and layer elements up to get the look I want. For instance, on my cloth, I used the Texturing XYZ muslin tiling map for the weave, but then I added in directional noise, going through a levels node to add variety to the horizontal weave. I did this at a couple of different sizes to break up the surface more, and then added bobbles and staining and dirt on top. The final render is done in Maya and Arnold, with a 16K V-face map split into channels providing the skin details. I used the region masks Texturing XYZ provides to be able to dial in the strength of the displacement and the roughness of the skin per region. Finally, I added fuzz onto the clothing to add realism and break the texture map surface feeling. As with any asset or image, and especially what you are doing to a deadline, there's numerous things that you will look at and think you could have done better. If I were to go back to this, I'd spend more time getting more variation and wear into surfaces and adding more details that I think would support what I was trying to communicate about the character. Some specific damages or wear would have been nice, such as maybe the odd hole or stray thread in the fabrics. The leathers should look more used and tatty, especially in places where they will come under stress from bending in use. And the antlers, I feel, could have more love to them and more history. but there always needs to be a point where, as an artist, we stop, move on, and apply what we've learned to make the next asset that little bit better. Thanks so much for watching. I hope this has been helpful in some way. Please check out Mari 6, especially the roller stamp brush if you haven't already. It's great. Thank you so much.
Oh gosh, it's just gonna be me. Amy. Hello. Welcome back. So, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for taking on this project for us, Amy. I know it was, well, as you said in your presentation, a little bit of a short deadline, but it was absolutely amazing. We are all very big fans of uh, the elven lady who we still have not named. If anybody thinks of a
Yeah.
cool name, put it in the chat because we've not been able to come up with one. But she's got a cool backstory. She needs a cool name.
Yeah.
And I also want to, sorry, Amy.
I was just going to say I ran out of imagination at that point. I'm very bad at naming things.
Me too. But yeah, I also wanted to also give a shout out to Jeremy at Texturing XYZ, who is not here today, but I don't know if he'll see this recording, hopefully at some point. But he has been extremely helpful. He put us in touch first and foremost, which was amazing. And I know you mentioned in your presentation he helped out providing you with all of the Texturing XYZ V-Face maps and all that. So let's get started with the Q&A. So if you have questions for Amy or you have questions for me, don't know why you'd have questions for me. My part's a lot less interesting than Amy's was. Please do pop them into the questions tab. We will ping them up. We will try to respond to as many of them as we can. And in the meantime, I will ask some handy questions that I prepared earlier for Amy. So I wanted to, I guess, start by asking you with the industry that you've worked in. You've worked in a number of different companies across like VFX, film, TV, games as well. I wanted to ask, in your experience, have you found that the character artist and the texture artist process, have you found that it differs much between them? Have you found like you enjoy one over the other? Give a little bit of insight about the differences you've seen.
I think, I mean, obviously, you know, the bigger the company, the more those two roles split, I think, but you know, one of the kind of advantages of where I am in the industry right now is that you do often get the chance to take on, you know, the whole asset and do, you know, modeling all the way through to texturing and things like that. So, you know, for me, I think people have just started over the years. Texturing has just become a much more involved and serious thing, you know, than it used to be, I think. And obviously with, you know, software like Mari and Substance Painter and all those kind of, you know, things, you know, there's what you can achieve in a small amount of time is you know, so much greater than you could in the past. So yeah, I think it has, you know, texturing obviously is massively important because it doesn't matter how good your model is or your asset is. If the textures are bad, it's never going to look good. I don't know if that answers your question particularly, but
yeah, it does. I think it harks back to something you talked about quite a lot in your presentation as well, which is it really matters, you know, how that texture looks. It's not just as simple as, I think you used the example of dirt in your presentation. It's not as simple as just painting a bunch of dirt over it and going from there. Everything has a story. Everything has a history of how it got to be in that particular moment.
Yeah, I think it's just always about, you know, considering that story and that backstory, like I said in the presentation, really. You know, it's I think one of the pitfalls of having, you know, procedural tools and things, you know, that can generate effects for you very quickly is that people tend to lean on them a bit too much. And I think as you know, Michael said in the chat, hand painting in textures is essential to kind of get to elevate them to the next level. And with that comes the consideration of where you are putting the details and where you're putting the wear and the dirt and things like that. And it's quite a common, as a lead anyway, I see quite regularly, with junior artists going into the industry and things like that, is that you ask them to add dirt to something, and you can see that they will put a blanket covering of grunge map over the whole thing, as I showed in the video. And it's understandable, but it's about getting into that mode of thinking and understanding how to build up dirt and wearing things to make something more realistic, rather than just layering on effects, which ends up being visual noise essentially. So
Yeah, definitely.
yeah.
Definitely. I think, like you said, it's something that I think has become quite common with younger artists, students, that sort of thing, people trying to get into the industry. And it's something that, at least from the Foundry side as well, we are hearing quite a lot from studios, is that we wish our junior artists had more education in like the theory behind texturing. Like they've done the research into what, what makes a metal oxidize. Do they do it in different ways
Mm.
depending on, if it's exposed to like salt air? Does that happen differently? Like
Yeah.
that sort of thing is so important. So
Yeah.
important to get it right.
Yeah, and it just takes any asset from from one level straight up to the next thing. And and
Yeah.
understanding how things are constructed as well, and what material they're constructed out of, and all those kind of things. The that backstory. Like I said, is the more research and the more you start to understand these things and know these things and build up you know um a bit of a library of information about all these different materials and how they're made, then the quicker you can achieve something that looks realistic, I think.
Yeah,
So
definitely. And I assume, correct me if I'm wrong, but I assume that on the industry side, a lot of that onus is put on to the texture artist. You're not going to get all of the answers on where different, where metal should have rubbed down or where dirt is going to be. That's not going to come just from the concept or your art department.
no, and this is where, like, as a texture artist, you can really take ownership of something and put creativity into it. Because people sometimes tend to think of the creativity of an asset just being the concept and the design and the overall thing. But there's so much opportunity for creativity in texturing, in the sculpt, in the details, like you say, and none of that will be in the concept most of the time. You'll get quite, especially in my line of work, in my kind of corner of the industry, you can get very very broad concepts, or very minimal concepts sometimes, and
Mm.
have to work from there and fill in the details yourself. And the best texture artists, the senior texture artists, will be able to do that. Will be able to kind of bring that extra depth to the character without having to have it clearly signposted to them. Obviously, things like material callouts always help, getting those on a project, some indication of how worn something is, and things like that. But I think it's obviously you're not going to have a big backstory for every single asset that you do, but I think at least figuring out those basic things, like the environment and where they live, and those kind of where they are in that particular instance, and some basic creative pillars about the character, so you
Yeah.
can feed those into the character, into the textures. um and yeah, like I say, that's for me where you can get a lot of input and ownership into an asset, and kind of take it to a higher level myself.
Yeah. Definitely. Someone in the chat, Dan, thank you for your advice in the chat. You also suggested going out and taking reference photos. Yes, absolutely. Please do that. That is so useful, so handy to have. Is that something that you do, Amy?
Yeah, I think you'll find that a lot of people who work in texturing, have a bit of a photography kind of sideline of just like
Yeah.
going around with a camera everywhere and taking pictures, and seeing an interesting door somewhere or something like that, and or anything that's kind of just strikes you as interesting and taking photographs of it. It's an odd profession to be in sometimes. You just kind of see someone's jacket going down the street and you think, oh, that's really interesting old vintage jacket, and you want to stop them and take pictures. I don't, but I do want to sometimes.
Just slyly taking pictures.
Yeah.
Mine is rust. I see some good rust. I'm like, oh, I've got to take a picture of that rust right now. It'll come in handy one day.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
gonna ask some questions that have been coming in. So let's start with this question from Maria. I'm going to read all of the questions out just for the purposes of the recording as well, because it doesn't pop up. So, do you usually make the roughness maps from scratch, or do you find that you're converting the diffuse into a black and white image and then tweaking from there? And based on your workflow, why do you do it that way?
I would say I tend to kind of create them in tandem a little bit. So as I'm adding each layer, then I'm thinking about how much diffuse, how much roughness that is contributing. Rather than creating a color pass and then going back and generating the roughness from that. I tend to work so that I've got my base color, and then I'm adding
Yeah.
a particular type of tarnish on, say like on a metal there, a particular tarnish on that, and I'll think, how much do I want this to contribute to the roughness? How much do I want it to contribute to the diffuse? And that's the reason why I work that way. Is just habit really, and just because I find that easier. I find it much easier to consider one thing at a time, and see in the viewport the material as a whole, rather than just looking at the diffuse pass and then going back and working in the roughness. I do think it is better that way, because you're not going to kind of pile up all these things and then have to go back and try and figure
Mm.
out what's contributing to what, and so on. Obviously, your organization of the scene comes into it there. But yeah, that's generally the way I work, is doing everything all at once. So the bump, roughness, metallicity, all those kind of things, and diffuse. I do them all at the same time, basically. And
So you're working
that's
in the context of the shader rather
yeah,
than
as
individual
a lot
channels.
a lot of the time, yeah, yeah. Obviously, I do switch between passes, and you can see in the video I kind of switch between passes because I want to see what's happening in those passes, but I'm still working on everything at the same time. And that's why, for me, when Mary kind of got nodes, that was great, because it makes it so much easier to do that. I'm really excited about the teleport node, because that makes it easier as well, because you don't have big.
We're all excited with the
Yeah.
teleport node.
Um, so having that kind of that workflow where you're just building everything up all at once, is personally, the way I prefer it. I'm sure there's people out there who can do like a diffuse pass and then go back and do the roughness pass and things like that. And that's completely valid, but it's just my workflow.
Yeah, awesome. I'm going to answer this one. So, how do you plan your texturing, specifically things like details, when you're in the early sculpting stages, especially regarding UV organization and resolution?
So I mean, generally, you've always obviously got a decision about how much you're going to put in sculpt and how much you're going to put in texturing. In this case, is probably I kind of tended to think about putting more in texturing than sometimes, but I feel that any small surface details where you want things to be like really sharp, it's always better off doing in texturing. So I tend to kind of do bigger details in sculpting. Obviously, you can go to quite a fine level in sculpting, but when you need something to be really super sharp, then I prefer to kind of leave it in to texturing. And then as far as UV organization and things like that, it's like I said in the video, really organizing, like per material, by UDIM rows. I just find that useful when you're looking back on your UDIMs and things like that, to be able to kind of group things, and it's easier for selecting, like big areas if you want to select all your metals. Yeah, if you've not already got like a shader pass in there. And then, as far as any particular details are concerned, she's got some embroidery on the front of a hood, so straightening out those areas, making sure the straight is much easier to be able to then project anything on in UV space. Um, Textile density, obviously super important. If you apply one cloth weave over everything. You want your textile density to be the same across all of your UVs. So thinking about things like that, basically. I hope that answers your question. It's very much kind of trying to figure out what do I want to do in texturing, or what do I want to do in sculpt, and then making it as easy for yourself as possible in texturing, I think.
Front load what you can.
Yeah, sorting UVs so that it's as easy as possible once you get into texturing. Because the worst thing you can do is get into texturing and you're having to kind of like bend textures around to fit something, or work across a seam or something like that. So hiding your seams, all that kind of stuff. It's yeah.
Okay, next question. This is from Scott. So if you are coming from a more substance or a non-node based workflow, what, in your opinion, is the easiest way to familiarize yourself with a more nodes-based workflow, such as the one inside of Mari?
That's a tough question.
There's definitely a fear factor with the node graph in
Yeah, I
Mari
think
with a
so.
lot of artists.
Yeah, the node graph is deceptively, is very easy to use, really. And I think it's just thinking about, and that is part of why I work the way that I do, building everything up in the same way. Because if you are in substance, then you are kind of adding a layer, and you're adding the roughness, diffuse, all at the same time. And then coming into Mari and using the nodes, then I can do exactly the same thing, because I can connect the nodes up, or copy a node, or use a teleport node, to do that, to build everything at once. Obviously things like organization is key. Keeping using those backdrops and things, and trying to keep things as organized as possible. But I would just jump in, and remember, it's the same thing. You've got an image, you've got a mask. You're just blending things together, layering on things into the mask. It's very the translation between layers and nodes is a lot more intuitive than I think most people
Yeah,
expect it to be. And I personally, I really enjoy the node system in Mari. Just being able to see everything, being able to see what's doing what is it's a really it's much. I find it quite fast, and I find it quite easy, and I think if you just kind of jump in and just start messing around with it, and trying a few things, you're going to be dealing with the same nodes over and over again. For a lot of it, there's
yeah,
obviously a huge amount of nodes in there, but you're going to end up with using a few over and over again, and then just layering up effects, and layering up masks and layers and things like that. So yeah, just the best thing I can say is jump in and just start messing around with it, and make mistakes, and do things that are wrong,
yeah.
and learn from it that way, I think.
Test the boundaries of it,
Yeah.
really. I've probably said this on a webinar before at some point. If not, I say it all the time, so I'll say it again regardless. But I worked at Foundry for 2 years before, in the Mari team, before I willingly wanted to use the node graph. And when I did, I just thought, you know what, I'm going to learn the node graph. It takes like a day, really.
Yeah.
Once you've got your head around the transition of, oh, you know, a bottom transparency and a merge and a paint, that's a layer.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same, and it's so much more efficient to work with. So easy to see what you're doing and
Yeah.
debug.
I think the parallels with like building a shader in Arnold, as well as something like that. If you're in Maya or Houdini, and you wanting to build a shader, and if you're used to that way of working with nodes, then it's quite Mari is very simple to pick up from that point of view. And I think that's the beauty of the software right now, is it's all about what you're doing, the actual skill that you're putting into it,
Mm.
which I think is great. So,
Yeah, I agree with Michael in the chat as well. Once you've started using nodes, going back to layers is you don't really want to. It's very hard to do.
yeah, I just wouldn't now, I don't think.
I'm the same. I used to always be always layers, and now never. I'm gonna answer this question, which is for me, and a very, very hard question, Jens. So Jens asking, what personally would you like to change in Mari if you had unlimited resources? I don't know. Unlimited resources, as in, could I do absolutely everything? Because what I would want to do first is to really take a look at the first hour of Mari for artists. So, what's the Mari experience out of the box? What does it look like in that first hour? The creating a new project and then getting set up. How can we streamline that? And I say that would be my first thing with unlimited resources. That's something that we are actively trying to investigate as well to see what we can do over the next few years. And then otherwise, I have a bunch of stuff that I can't wait to tell you guys about, but I can't just yet. And if I got unlimited resources, I'd do them now instead of later on. But yes, good things are coming. And I am a big advocate for the artist and the artist being heard. So hopefully we will see a lot of that coming up. Hope that answers the question well enough. And there is a similar painful question for you, Amy, which comes from Rory. And Rory is asking, what would you like to see changed or added to improve Mari's material workflow?
Oh, I don't know.
You
Yeah,
can
that's
always say it's perfect. Nothing.
yeah, it's beautiful and it's perfect. Material workflow, I I I don't know. I guess I don't have any major kind of gripes right now with the actual material workflow. Um, I think the big thing, over the next year or so is going to be USD. And I know it's a bit of a cop out answer, but I think that's going to be kind of like the big area that we're going to be investigating. In all programs really. We already are doing it at work, obviously. So I think when programs like Mari are kind of taking that up. But yeah, there's on the spot right now with the level of nerves and anxiety I've got right now. It's difficult to kind of like pick one thing that I would improve in the in the material workflow. Um, yeah, it's I'm gonna have to kind of pass slightly on that one because my mind's just kind of going a little bit blank. It's
Don't worry.
Yeah, I do
Don't worry.
apologize.
No, don't worry. I think it's one of those things where the material system is so big, there's always going to be things you can do to make that experience a little bit nicer. And as technology evolves, that's going to keep growing as well. But if you are watching along, or Amy, if you want to, if anybody comes up with any ideas of how they would like to see Mari's material system or any other workflow improving or changing, send your feature requests over to the support team at support.foundry.com or support@foundry.com if you're emailing them. We will see every single request that comes in. Every single request goes direct through your support experts, and then it comes right in front of me and the Mari team, and we triage and talk about all of the different things and why it's so important to get it done there. So please do that. I think we have a few minutes left in terms of questions. So are there any that you would particularly love to answer, Amy? Looking at the question list.
There it is. Sorry, I wasn't sure what the
Underneath the
question.
chat.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm just scrolling through. I mean, I guess I can answer some of these some of the things that there's a few questions about which kind of work I prefer. Notice a good friend Adrian has asked if I prefer uh, texturing stylized or realistic, and I think the answer there is I love a variety. Which is again a bit of a cop out answer, but being able to kind of go between two different, several different styles across projects, always kind of keeps things interesting and fresh. Doing the stylized work can actually be quite challenging sometimes because you're trying to nail a particular look, and that involves syncing up the textures with the shader, and how they interact, and trying to figure out how to love Death and Robots especially. We didn't have a lot of time to develop a look for that.
It
We're quite a
looks
small team.
gorgeous. That episode
Thank
is
you, thank
gorgeous.
you. Yeah, it's a lot of hard work, by some very talented people, and yeah, we had quite a small amount of time to kind of develop the look, and how we make the textures, and how we then kind of like feed those into the shader, so that the shadows were breaking up and things like
Mhm,
that. So that can bring its own challenges, which is interesting and exciting and stressful all at the same time. But then sometimes when you've been doing stylized textures for a while, you just want to kind of jump in and do a really dirty piece of cloth or something. I don't know. It's just you want to, it's quite nice going into doing something realistic, and just knowing, like, this is what I'm making. I want to make it look as good as I possibly can do. And going about that. And then I guess, yeah. The question here: do you like texturing or modeling more? And I'm gonna say ever so slightly texturing, even if I love modeling.
really?
Yeah, yeah. It's not a thing, but it's just. And the reason why I say that is because there's a certain point when you've done your model, and if you're happy with your model and stuff, and you start texturing it, and I really feel like that's the point where something starts to kind of come to life, and you're starting to
Mhm.
kind of add all this kind of interest and detail to it, and things like that. And there's just this little kind of, when it's going right, I just get a little burst of satisfaction out of it, and out of that part. I love every part of the process. I'm one of those weird people who even enjoys doing UVs and retopology,
I
and
was
stuff like
having
that.
that conversation yesterday. I
Yeah,
love UV unwrapping. It's so
yeah.
therapeutic in such a torturous way. It's so
Yeah,
nice.
it's a certain kind of, you've been focusing on doing a sculpt, and then all of a sudden you just get to just chill out and be a bit zen and watch things unfold. It's beautiful.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. There is some
um,
agreement coming from the chat, so
yes, yeah,
yes.
people who love the grind. It's you gotta love the grind. So yeah, but there is something that's deeply satisfying, to me about texturing. But I do love all parts of the process. And if you told me I couldn't do one part,
Mm.
like for us, I would be very upset. So I'll let you pick a question if we've got time.
Um, so I will very quickly say, there is a question somewhere that I've lost about will we ever consider macOS support again? We do consider this continuously. It's never a we're done, never to return. It's a very lengthy discussion that continuously is something that we'll always evaluate, and it just comes down to a lot of different caveats, such as development, such as Apple's move away from OpenGL. So it's just whether or not the resources are there and whether it makes sense for Mari and our user base. And last question before we go. I picked one and then I scrolled past it, so that's good. Here. This is from Marcus. Are there any secret combinations of blending modes that you like to use that you feel might be often overlooked, or a specific node setup that you like?
Um, I don't know if anything's particularly secret, but I do. I feel like I have, when it kind of comes down to actually my the technical side of using Mari, I'm probably quite basic, I suppose. For me, it's just more about you're using whatever I can to get the look I want, rather than I don't have a kind of go-to go-to little kind of combination of nodes or anything like that. So
Mhm.
yeah, boring answer is whatever I need to do to kind of make something do what I want it to, to kind of get the result I want. um I think the the secret for me is always just, it's not really a secret. We've already talked about it in this thing. Is always just the point when you need to resort to paint. Not resort, but you need to move on
Paint
into
manually.
hand painting, yeah, and painting
Yeah.
manually, and to kind of get the look. Because I think sometimes it's easy to kind of drop into that mode of just wanting to do things procedurally and build things up procedurally. But the only way you ever get something looking great is by dropping down paint nodes, and doing that kind of combination of building up a mask with lots of, you can build up a mask with grunges and things like that, and then put a paint node down and multiply the mask that you've already got down. So you're using that paint node to reveal
Mhm.
your grunge in certain areas. But yeah, I think it's always just a case of getting onto the painting. I think is where you really start to add the
Yeah,
quality.
it's always worth a little bit of painting.
Yeah.
So, I think with that question, we are at the hour. So I'm going to say thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. There was a bunch of information in the recordings. You should all have access to it on demand now, so please do feel free to rewatch any of the areas that you would like to see again. If you want to check out any of the features of Mari, please do head over to our website and you can download trials. You can have a look at licenses if that's what you'd like to do. But thank you very much to Amy for doing this for us and being amazing as always. So yes, we will catch you all soon. Goodbye.
Thanks very much, everyone.